Sandra and Jean-Pierre are educators and practitioners. They're partners of Barclay Crousse, a firm that was founded in Paris in 1994 and that has been based in Lima, Peru since 2006, which is Sandra and Jean-Pierre's native home. The firm, which is certainly among the top 5 architectural firms in South America, manages a wide range of transcontinental projects that explore the bonds between architecture, landscape, and climate, which will be the focus of their talk this evening. Barclay and Crousse, who were the curators of the Peruvian Pavilion at the 15th International Architectural Venice Biennale in 2016, an exhibition that received a special mention by the Biennale jury, are the recipients of many significant national and international awards. These include the MCHAP, the Mies Crown Hall Americas Prize in 2018 for the best built work of architecture in North, Central, and South America, the Oscar Niemeyer Prize in 2016, the Peruvian National Prize of Architecture in 2014 and 18, and the Latin American Prize in 2013, among many other international awards, including the 20th Pan American Biennale in Quito in 2016 and the 14th Buenos Aires Biennale in 2013. I should also mention that Sandra Barclay was the recipient of the 2018 Women in Architecture Award from the Architectural Review in London. I had the great pleasure of first meeting Jean-Pierre when we were on the Mies Crown Hall Americas Prize jury together in 2016. And we spent many hours in closed rooms reviewing the top architectural projects in the Americas, an award that 2 years later, Barclay and Crousse would win, following Herzog and Demeron, Alvaro Siza, and Sana from the years before. And as part of the jurying process, we spent 12 days together across 6 cities and 5 countries, visiting the projects chosen to be finalists, and spent quite a lot of airtime in planes together as well. And during that time, I was also able to meet Sandra and visit some of Barclay and Crousse's projects in Lima, including their Place of Remembrance Cultural Center for the Reconciliation of the Peruvian People. What was so incredibly compelling for me about this project was not only its political and social justice issues that were taken on by its programming, but the incredible sculptural qualities of the building, its very skillful insertion into the territorial logics of the landscape of which it seemed to emerge, and the sensory qualities of its materiality, and the inventiveness of its approach to surface, space, and substance. And I have since discovered these qualities in all of their projects and have been extremely impressed with the incredible cultural and architectural production of the firm, as I'm sure that you will be as well. So with that, please join me in welcoming Sandra Barclay and Jean-Pierre Crousse. You can just use the little clap hands on your participant button to show your appreciation, and I'll hand it off to the 2 of them.
Thanks, Ayla.
Thanks, Ayla.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming.
And thank you, Sneha, for organizing all of this. We want to thank first Ayla Youth for inviting us as professors this year, as Shure Visiting Professors. Also, we want to thank Felipe for his guidance. And of course, we are delighted to teach at UVA, even if in recent times we had to take this challenge to switch to a virtual mode. And this is possible with a great commitment and enthusiasm of our fellow teacher, Belén González Aranguren, and our great group of students. So as this Zoom lecture is a kind of experiment for us, don't hesitate to interrupt us if there is something wrong with the transmission. Don't forget, we are with a Peruvian internet. So
not very reliable.
Yeah.
Anyway, we love experiments, so we're very glad to do it this way. So we consider our work as an ongoing research in which each project informs the next one in terms of hypotheses, strategies, and building processes. In every project we do, we kind of try that each project inform the next one in terms of hypotheses, and our effort is to find the good questions that will guide us in our decisions. Not necessarily pretending to find the answers, but to make us think about the meanings or the meaning our buildings should convey with the means we have at our disposal. So
we're starting to share the
we're going to start to share our screen.
Presentation, yeah.
Okay. Now, is it fine like this, Sneha?
This is perfect, yes.
Okay,
okay, great.
Perfect. So we'll present you 6 projects located in the desert strip of Peruvian coastline, explaining more the strategies that we used than describing the projects alone. So, okay. So due to Peru's extraordinary conditions, we have at our disposal some wonderful ingredients to work with. The first one, culture, that comes from 5,000 years of civilization in the Central Andes. Territory, where its uniqueness generates also a unique mild climate. Place, that for us is always key to understand what we should do. Program, that we like to see as usage and not simply as a list of surfaces. And finally, technology, taking advantage of our non-industrialized craftsmanship and available technology. So strategy allows to carefully calibrate these ingredients in order to give meaning in each building to the essential elements of architecture, which are space, light, matter, and time.
Our first ingredient, culture, is the addition of meaningful experiences that are integrated in our minds, arising to our consciousness when doing a project. Our long stay in Europe as young architects, 16 years, and a patient search through drawing help us create a personal visual culture from the physical experience of the buildings and not by images. A constant and resolute work is, of course, part of this patient search that constitutes what we call the culture of work. In each project, we go from sketches to the model, then to precise drawing into the reality, and then back again to sketches, models, and drawings. It's a circular dynamic between mind, hand, and matter. The third aspect of culture comes from the layering of architecture through time. We are interested in studying our fantastic pre-Columbian legacy from the design strategies set in place to build a cultural landscape and not simply seeing them as archaeological remains. We are increasingly asking ourselves if nature, territory, landscape, and architecture can still be seen as interdependent and with the same value. We try to abandon the modernist, rigid separation of the disciplines of architecture, urban design, and landscape architecture, which have become distinct and often polarized professions.
Understanding territory our second ingredient, is key to our work. The German scientist Alexander von Humboldt was the first European to realize that the section and not the plan is the only way to understand the Central Andes region, where modern Ecuador and Peru are located nowadays. In Peru, the combination of the Andes and a cold current coming from Antarctica that has Humboldt's name produce a unique tropical landscape. So we will redraw this section, including the sea current named after him. So we start by a horizontal line that represents the ocean. The west is on the left, the east to the right. Then comes an extremely steep topography with a 10,000 meter gradient in distance of only 200 kilometers. These geographical circumstances generate a unique landscape and a unique climate. In the Amazon basin, at right, climate responds to a normal tropical conditions. But at left, in the Pacific basin, a permanent mild temperature and no precipitation at all happens when a sea current, seawater convection, and air thermic inversion combine to create an almost permanent cloud over the coastal desert strip. And Lima, our city, is placed right there in the red circle between the abyss and the summit. The 6 projects that we will show you are linked by these territorial sections. They are all here in this situation, very far from each other in plan, but in the same location in section. And if the plan allows to understand distribution of spaces, only the section reveals the wonder of space, light, and time playing together. And that's what we love about sections.
As Jean-Pierre was saying, these territorial conditions make our tropic very different from the usual image we have of this latitude. In the coast, for instance, instead of palm trees and white sand beaches, we find an extremely arid and yet very humid desert. Our coast is a misty land with no shadows and no contrast because of the lack of sunshine at least 8 months in a year. These conditions generate a very mild climate, our third ingredient. Climate gives us a huge opportunity for redefining architecture in its role of providing shelter. With absence of rains, extreme hot or cold days, no strong winds, we can concentrate our effort in its capacity of being generous and in the creation of intimacy and well-being. Shelter is not the issue here, and interior and exterior are not defined by airtightness, but by the relationship between intimacy and vastness.
It is in the edge of the Bay of Lima where we had the opportunity to build the first project we're going to show you. That is the place of remembrance in the square, red square. This project is about a place for reconciliation of Peruvian people, like a sort of cultural center that would articulate the efforts to show to the future generations the memory of 20 years of extreme violence that devastated our country and left more than 70,000 deaths. This place has become key in the aspiration of our country to prevent repeating the errors of the past. Place is our fourth ingredient, where layers of memory are frozen, waiting to be revealed by our intervention. As Rafael Moneo says, and he was a member of the jury in this competition, the architect, I am quoting, the architect should discern those attributes of the site that should be maintained and emphasized, and those who should disappear in the new reality that emerges through the construction process, end of quote. we started our understanding of the site through its own memory. The site where we had to intervene was a residual area left by destruction of one of the cliffs when a roadway of the beaches was created. So we decided to embed the building within this territorial logic by building an artificial cliff. In that way, our addition would be related to memory, not only by its programmatic content, the memory of those violent years, but by the memory of Lima's landscape. Architecture helps discover the site, reveal it, and make it evident. In fact, the building, which is here, closes a sequence of cliffs and ravines that are like 10 kilometers long that characterizes the Bay of Lima. In the same way that territory is more easily understood by a section, as Humboldt showed us, we'll explain all our projects only by the section. This is a challenge we want to take because we think section is the key to understand these projects. So if we draw a cut-off longitudinal section of the cliffs, looking to this city, we can visualize the infill made to create the descent to the beach. A compact building near the natural cliffs allowed us to economize both on the number of foundation piles and in their depth. In this way, the territorial logic could meet the economic logic. We have to know that the Peruvian government didn't spend a penny in this building. It was all built by donations from the German government, the European Union, and the Swedish government. This is the only place of remembrance, of place of memory that was built almost against the will of the government. So this simple strategy opened possibilities for responding also to environmental needs. Opening the building to the cliff allow a controlled natural lighting, and close it into the northwest prevent us from the sunlight of the setting sun and the noise of the coastal highway here, and an open inner space inside the building create a natural ventilation, limiting the use of air conditioning to the auditorium alone.
The site had still a strong handicap. There was almost no connection to the city. A long distance separated the site from the main urban avenue with public transportation. We decided to transform this major problem into a design opportunity. We created a narrow passage to introduce time in the way we approach the building. The visitor can take the time to distance himself from the city, leave daily preoccupations behind, and get ready for an exhibit which is not easy to see. The visitor is literally submerged in a gap created between the cliff and the building. The act of descending into this crevice turns gravity into a very explicit force. At the bottom of this newly created ravine, there is a marked physical consciousness, a kind of intensified presence. We are no more in an urban setting, nor in a natural landscape. The other side of this artificial cliff is defined by a platform that looks over the sea, conceived as a public space for reconciliation.
The pathway continues inside the building. A system of ramps ascending toward the light leads us to the exhibition spaces. Everything we see here in this picture is in the order of the permanent, because space in this building is defined by structure, not by technology, not by thousands of layers of materials of insulation, waterproofing, heating, and cooling. So once structure defines what is permanent, once structure defines what is space, it allows us to configure not only the interiors, but also the transition between the interior and exterior, which has the responsibility of capturing light and bringing it to the interior.
The program, our fifth ingredient, isn't a list of functions, but the way usage can inform space as a container of experiences. The notion of time is present also when we walk through the building. The different exhibition spaces are accessible through a series of ramps. We climb smoothly, taking time, guided by natural light, so we can rise our sight and move through space, dissociating the path of the eye from the path of the body. This is an image of the completed building before the collection came in. The railings and the technical columns that contain the electric and security systems are the non-permanent elements. They can be easily replaced with evolution of needs and technology.
Technology is our sixth ingredient. It is defined by what's available in the place we're intervening. And in Peru has a lot to do with craftsmanship and limited resources, rather than the illusion of perfection the industrial components might give us. The building processes are very important here, as the design process does not finish with the construction drawings. Being aware that the quality of public construction was not as good as we expected, the project's strength shouldn't be based in the quality of finishings. The artisanal formwork that we decided to use, as you see in this image, were assembled by hand using all wooden planks and introduced indetermination that absorbed all the true imperfections. We consider the traces of those imperfections as part of the memory of construction. You can see all these really made by hand, no? And suddenly we realized the plans that we have drawn lost their supremacy as the building itself started to draw a map describing its construction process. The irregular walls, the cobblestone pavement you see here, and the traces of handcrafting are the evidence of human labor and become the maps of human intervention. At left, we can see the footprints of the watchdog you just saw in the other picture, that we insisted to keep them in the stamped cement floor of the ramp. At right, the workers put their hands in the entry to the public plaza as an act of memory of the hands who literally built this place. So let's see now how the building becomes alive, because it's very difficult to explain this only by images. So we will use also some videos. we can say that this building is very controversial. There's half the country that wants to shut it down, to close it, and the other half of the population that really supports it. And it's a collection that is not only talking about violence, but also about corruption in the government and the challenges that we as a country have in our responsibility in the future. This is our former president that is in jail now, for example.
We find similar landscape conditions all along the Peruvian coastal desert. This cove, located some 120 kilometers south from Lima, is a place where we designed and built 6 beach houses in 6 consecutive years. It was an incredible design laboratory in which we learned from one house to another on how to relate to this landscape. Without the need for shelter, the creation of intimacy becomes a priority. Intimacy allows us to live in this vast and absolute landscape. Ancient Peruvians understood this very well. The platforms and the enclosures are still valid strategies nowadays for downscaling the vastness and abstraction into inhabitable places. We can focus on bringing the landscape logics into architecture, creating meaningful microcosmos in each house. So we draw the slope of the cove, then an emerging platform in order to define a new horizontal ground for life. After that, we define an enclosure that ensures domesticity and intimacy, providing shade to the platform and framing the ocean view. Finally, a pool brings the ocean to the platform and serves as a natural railing. Underneath, we excavate the platform to create the rooms for intimacy, the bedrooms, protected from the setting sun by the pool. Akise's house, designed a few years before, while still working in Paris, was the starting point of this laboratory. The W houses were designed in different years between 2008 and 2014. They followed the same strategy as Akise House, which ensured a strong identity beyond the differences in program. From the ocean, the houses seems emerging from the cliff as extruded volumes, while from the desert, they seem to be excavated on the sand. And now let's see how life takes place in the house.
Of course, these are all houses set in a magnificent landscape. But how to imagine a microcosm in a urban setting? So let's see. So back in Lima, very near from the place of remembrance that is here, we were asked to design a house in a typical urban plot, 50-meter wide, 35-meter deep. In this case, we decided to create our own landscape in the confined space of the plot. So we draw the plot section with the back neighbor at left and the street at right. Then we define the limits of the plot, mandatory in the urban regulations. And we introduce open air features as a pool at left, a pond at right, and gardens planted with trees. A series of 3 vaulted bridges spread over the width of the plot, and these bridges sustain the program of bedrooms and intimate spaces, leaving the ground floor completely fluid and open. So from the street, the house doesn't reveal its interior. It's a very common feature in Lima. The first vaulted bridge acts as a threshold between the street and the interior landscape. Once you cross it, space suddenly unfolds. We discover a world where interior and exterior blurs with reflection and transparency. The space expands through these vaulted bridges, liberating the boundaries between house, garden, and pool between interior and exterior. The vaulted bridges are linked by suspended metallic walkways, which create a new transparency at the upper level, where bedrooms are located. From the bedrooms, the enclosure appears as an artificial horizon.
We move now some 400 kilometers south to the Barajas Desert, one of the most arid ones in the world. Paracas people lived here 2,000 years ago and were the predecessors of the Nazca, the ones who traced the famous Nazca lines. The Paracas Archaeological Site Museum was destroyed by a strong earthquake in 2007, and the European Union financed its reconstruction and launched an architectural competition the following year. We had a meager budget and a sublime landscape as main ingredients for this project. For us, it was not only about designing an archaeological museum, but also an attempt to introduce landscape logics into architecture. Seen from the archaeological burial site, the museum is perceived as a layer built over thousands of other geographic and cultural layers. It modifies landscape and at the same time depends on it, as would a rock or a trace in the desert. Again, it's not about providing shelter, it's about providing the correct contained space for inhabiting. The first element we defined was an enclosure for downscaling the vastness of the desert landscape. An unfolding roof is conceived as a fifth facade that is actually seen from the archaeological site. This fifth facade protects us from the strong winds typical of this region, and of course, it protects us from the sun. Finally, a series of low-tech environmental devices find their place beneath the roof and help defining the exhibition spaces. The original museum was built in 1964 by German archaeologist Friedrich Engel. We decided to keep its memory by building in the exact same location, respecting the overall volume and geometry, and by the way, avoiding archaeological surveys that were mandatory if we built elsewhere in that site. As we couldn't reuse the stones and the original quarry was inside the protected area and therefore impossible to obtain new stones, we decided to use the same polished ceramic technique for finishing the pre-Columbian bases, rescaled to the size of the building. We used a puzzolanic red cement resistant to the saltpeter of the desert soil, finished with a handmade polishing as if it was a huge ancient vase. And again, as in the place of remembrance, the building becomes a map describing human traces of construction. A porch announces the entrance to the enclosure, acting as a threshold between the vastness of the desert and the open air inner circulation. The different programs are related among them by this contained exterior space. The main volume at left shelters the archaeological exhibition, while the volume at right hosts the workshops, services, and spaces for the community. The vertical volumes are the environmental devices that help control light and natural ventilation, avoiding sun coming in during sandstorms. Each device have an additional function. One of them constitutes the entrance of the museographic spaces, while another defines a courtyard for the archaeological quarters. These low-tech environmental devices are designed to be able to receive more sophisticated technological equipment in the future, if necessary. They define the exhibition spaces and organize the museographical sequence in a continuous and fluid space. The devices are also structural elements, and when they reach the southern facade, they become windows framing the boreal hills.
From this experience, we started using the puzzolanic red cement in other projects in which it made sense. as in this house, we designed some years later, some 100 kilometers north from Lima. And this cement, we should say, this concrete that we use, it has no tint. It's only obtained by the color of the cement. So the program is divided in separate volumes that merge with the natural topography. Here the enclosure fades away and you have to find your way into the house by turning around containing walls and platforms. We organize the main spaces under a vaulted roof, providing shade to the social and dining areas. The rest of the intimate spaces are located underneath platforms and their top surfaces being used as gardens or terraces, as we can see here at left. So we go down the cliff.
I'm going to take care of dinner tonight. Let me know when you sort of get a feeling of appetite or.
I'll go with the flow.
All right.
I think someone forget to put their mic.
Can you all mute your microphones?
Well.
I just muted them.
Okay, thank you.
Not all deserts are as arid as this one. If we go 1,000 kilometers north, we arrive to Piura, where desert is formed essentially by carob trees growing over sand dunes. Every 10 or 15 years, tropical rains come down with El Niño phenomenon, letting them grow and survive until another one comes 10 years later. Piura is located in this landscape. It's a booming city only 4 degrees south from the equator. The local university needed more space for welcoming a new student population from low-income rural backgrounds, being able to pursue their education thanks to a government scholarships.
In 2015, Piura University accepted 700 of these students, so new facilities of generic classrooms and faculty offices were needed. Their aspiration was to take this opportunity to improve teaching infrastructure, and it gave us the opportunity to go beyond a standard response to this need. When the university was founded 50 years ago, it looked like the top image. When El Niño phenomenon happened in 1983, the provost followed the advice of some brave professors and decided that the first move after the completion of the first building you see was to plant carob trees that we call algarrobos that will grow with the heavy rains of El Niño. This vision took the university to look as in the bottom image today. The decision of start developing a campus by planting trees instead of buildings was, of course, a big inspiration for us. Our first question was about how should be a place for learning here in this tropical dry forest in the middle of the desert. Reading Louis Kahn is always a good hint when we want to go back to the roots of the question. So as he said, schools began with a man under a tree who did not know he was a teacher, sharing his realization with a few others who did not know they were students. The tropical dry forest helped us translate this very easily into architecture. Again, the section can help us understand the project. We start drawing the soft hills of the tropical dry forest, then the planted carob trees and the clearing left for future buildings. We started by extending the shade of the forest at the place of the building. A single horizontal line is created to define a shaded space capable of creating good conditions for learning. Then the program grows, as in La Tourette, from the rooftop down to the ground. The result is a series of buildings which are less important than the spaces left in between them.
These are the places for informal learning. The creation of non-hierarchical in-between spaces for students to study, eat, connect, and discuss together outside the classrooms contributes to creating a sense of community. Social and economic boundaries are blurred between the newly arrived rural students and the local urban ones. These thoughts brought us to abandon the traditional type of educational building, shifting from the typical pavilion scheme into a learning landscape. By doing that, we were not only introducing the landscape of the dry forest, but we were also creating a kind of new urban space within. The building sits in the campus and appears rotated from the urban grid as we align it to the cardinal points.
As in the dry forest, where the single tree is no more important than the whole, 6 different building types from 11 independent structures disposed in a regular volume of 70 by 70 by 9 meter height volume. And this apparently compact scheme shelters in reality an extremely permeable, shaded and cross-ventilated space.
Following the logics of an oriented building, the south and north sides are protected by vertical louvers, which are very efficient to protect both facades in this latitude. In the west facade, a system of prefab concrete panels protect the faculty offices from the setting sun. The building that hosts the ramps and services constitute the east side, where are located the access from the campus pedestrian pathway.
The entrance building is in fact a threshold where we pass from the strong glare of the equator. We are in only 4 degrees south from the equatorial line to the shaded exterior spaces of the learning landscape. The lattice shuttering serves as a light modulator in order to accommodate our eyes to the shaded half-light spaces, while we go up through the ramps or just we get into the building. The narrow gaps that single buildings leave between them because of seismic regulations help the light come in and favors natural ventilation. The gaps oriented east-west are in fact calendars that register the sound inclination over the year. As we see here, we are only 4 degrees south, so the sun comes vertical from the north in winter and from the south in summer. So this picture, for example, was taken during winter because it's inclined to the north that is here. And when this line will appear in these walls, we know it's summertime. And there are others that are oriented north-south, so they are sun clocks that register the daily movement of the sun. And there are moments in which both directions cross each other, where calendars and sun clocks meet.
There are all through the building spaces where people can gather, rest, or chat in between classes. Spaces are modulated to favor different kinds of gathering together. Many things can happen in these intermediate spaces, as this informal class. As we get into the complex, Thus, these spaces become more important until we arrive to its core, where the intermediate spaces are crossed by a stretch of the tropical dry forest.
So let's see now how a normal day goes by in this building. This student was really, really late. It was not an actor. This building doesn't have air conditioning. It's only air conditioning is only in the classes for the master program, which was needed to have the certificates of excellence. I don't know, which is a very sad story because we really can avoid at all air conditioning if we are well oriented. In the landscapes of intimacy, space flows from the inside out, creating places to be inhabited between nearness and vastness. Those places have the ambition to run into microcosmos, to turn into microcosmos, where a new reality arises from the transformation of what was there before by the architectural intervention. Only if the ingredients we use and the essential elements of architecture becomes interdependent and inseparable between them, we will achieve the needed pertinence to give sense to our doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre and Sandra. I know this is a strange moment where the one thing we don't get is the resounding applause that you're going to have to imagine for the moment. We haven't figured out how to do that properly technologically. So I thought maybe I could start us off with a couple questions, and then we could open it up to the audience, our virtual audience. And first, maybe I thought I would start with the issue of landscape, the relationship of architecture to landscape, because it is obviously so strong within all of your projects. And I've always been fascinated in the relationship between architecture and landscape, in the ways in which architects draw upon, let's say, different qualities or different logics of landscape or of the geographical and territorial to influence the making of architecture. And this is, of course, a key to your work, and it happens in many different ways in each project. But one of the things that I think is so compelling is that you draw from the qualities of landscape without either being overly mimetic or overly formal. In the first case, because your projects still retain a very strong sense of the architectonic, while simultaneously embedding themselves seamlessly in the landscape. So you take certain qualities, I could say in the place of remembrance, for example, you take the dimensional qualities of that landscape without being mimetic of the form of the rock, let's say, that becomes a part of it. And in the second case, where I feel that the work isn't overly formal as a kind of representation, is because you're thinking about the landscape is through its form, but also its materiality and its performance. For example, I'm really happy that you started with that really beautiful sectional sketch and you ended with that refers to the canopy of trees in the context of the Pierre University. And it's the need for shade that influences the making of the section. So it's not just the form of the tree, but it's what the tree actually produces. And you've talked about the many conditions that influence your work, but it seems as if the site is really key to understanding the relationship to landscape and its logic. So I'm interested if you could elaborate a little bit about how you start that process in terms of what you mine or what you decide to mine from that landscape or what you deem to be important in the projects at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
Okay, no, I think the most important thing is to learn to listen, no? To listen to the pre-existences. Is not only landscape, is also, it could be also buildings that are around. We have some projects that we didn't show here that are in a more urban setting. But I think the first thing is to learn to listen to place, what the place is trying to what the place can reveal and which features are not very important. So the new project, the new reality we are going to build, because building in a site is always transformative action that of course can destroy landscape, can make it better. It depends on how do we transform the pre-existence. And there, I don't know, there's no rules. I would say it's not systematic, for example, that we go first to see the site. We always see the site, of course, but not always at the really first stage of thinking about the project. That's why our buildings have also their own architectural logic that responds to program, to usage, to economy of means, because some of the things we learned also by, maybe we can elaborate that later, but some of the things we learned coming back to Peru is that in Peru, the main problem is the lack of money, the lack of means in order to build. And also the general instability, the permanent crisis we are always crossing through. So yeah, those are all things that turn around our heads while designing this building.
I think it's very important also to conceive landscape not as a visual, not only as a visual element, no? Because, for example, for the place of remembrance, memory was key and complement this notion of landscape. What happened before the memory of the place, the destruction of the cliff. And so it's not only what we are seeing in the site now. And for example, in Piura, another thing that is related to the landscape is the feeling you have in temperature. No, that's not a visual element or feature of the landscape. You have to be there. You have to feel the sun really burning yourself, and you need shade. You need it's like essential.
There's a lot of radiation.
Yeah. So I think it's the wider conception of landscape that can inform really the project.
No, that's great. I'm going to ask you one more question about landscape, and then I'm going to shift to drawing. So maybe one of the biggest differences also between architecture and landscape, and we see this a lot, of course, at UVA because of the disciplines sitting side by side, is the expectation that that architecture will somehow be durable and will withstand the temporality of the living in some way, support it and frame it and create space for it, but also withstand it. And that this durability in some ways stands in for the durability of culture. And that the second, landscape always operates within the space of material transformation. Right? That a river wants to keep moving and doesn't want to be a shape per se, even though we always treat it often enough as a shape, or that a tree will continue to grow and transform, a sand dune will change with the wind, etc. So, but our industrial history, especially in the 20th century, engineered landscapes, you know, to control them, to resist their changeability, and it was part of our acculturation of them. And it's also why we are so challenged by them in the present. And it's made us rethink the way we think often about even the making of landscape. And so I'm interested perhaps in the opposite condition in relation to your own projects, which is how the changeability of climate and landscape might influence the way you think about the transformation of your projects over time. You know, within or over time, or your approach to materiality. You know, is this highly specific to the landscapes and climates that you've been operating within in Peru? How do you imagine, you know, some of these projects 10 years from now or 20 years from now? How would you like to see them change or not change?
Yeah, well, I think two things. We like very much, and that's part of the considering the building as a map of human intervention. A building should be also a map in the sense that it registers a previous action. So when we see the building, we would love also, and in fact they are, the building is changing all the time during the time. In this sense, in the coast is almost, there is a kind of strange weathering, if we can use this term, but not because there is weather, because it doesn't rain. It's like a non-climate we have in the desert coast. But what happens is there is a lot of dust, and dust stays also in vertical walls. So it's funny because we several people write us asking for our mixture of concrete in order to know how we managed to match the exact color of landscape. No? And we tell them that we're sorry, but it's a common concrete because we don't have the money to pay for a special concrete. And it's simply dust getting impregnated in this rough concrete that makes it exactly the same color as the landscape, because the landscape is full of dust. It's as simple as that. So I would say weathering in this sense by dust is an essential condition for integration to landscape.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, we're hesitated because we wanted to show you two projects in the Andes, so in a very different setting from the desert coast, but we had only 40 minutes, so we skipped them. But there are some constants and some changes by the fact that we're now building in places that are rainy, green, with a lot of plants, etc.
Yeah, and another, I think, important issue about time will be the fact that we are always trying to define space by structure. So when, because we don't need here layerings after structure, we are, each time the structure is finished, we can imagine also the future ruin or the building at the same time is the building that it's already finished. And we have always that in mind, no? Always thinking about the projects from inside out. And so space will remain.
Yeah. So I know I said I would ask you about drawing, which I'm going to, but because of you're talking about the dust and about materiality, and I think I'm really also very interested in the way you think about materiality. That on the one hand, the expression of a wide variation, you have a wide variation within the projects, but using a narrow material palette, you know, which I think is very interesting. And it's often through the inventiveness of the detail that the material gets transformed. You talked a lot about the importance of the traces of the building process being embedded in the making of a building. And you know, which is the other side, right, of the building changing over time. And you know, is this part of every project for you, and how does this transform? And I was thinking about this when you were showing the place of remembrance, because, you know, with the hands on the side of the building or the formwork showing, and obviously that's part of every process, right? There are always going to be the hands in the making of the building. So how do you think about this, or how do you select as part of the process, you know, which details you decide to amplify and which you suppress? And I think it's also would also be interesting for our students and guests about where you think about details in relation to your design process, because we're always shifting scales, you know, from the site to the building to the detail. You know, is there a kind of ordering of this for you, or does it come in at any point in time?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if I am always starting to...
I will start.
You start.
I think for us, details need to just insert in the logic of the building, and they are not like the principal preoccupation. They will like result always thinking that we need to stay essential, not to have sophisticated details, because then we will start depending on the quality of the builder or the constructor, and we will sure have problems. No? So just evacuate everything that is not necessarily to the project, and everything that is on non-essential. So I think
yeah, for example, the Akise house that we designed from Paris was a big lesson for us, because we were doing a house 10,000 kilometers away, and there were at the time there was only fax to communicate. Internet was really slow and bad. So what we decided is that the good detail was the one who local labor, so the people building there, the local people, the local builders could do could do nicely
and naturally.
Naturally. So what they already knew how to do it. Okay, and then years after, when we started building the place of remembrance, was the second huge time of learning in this sense, because when the tender was launched for the construction of the place of remembrance, there were like we were in election process, and there was the daughter of Fujimori, who was runner-up with an ex-military of the war against the Shining Path. So we were not sure the building was going to be done. And so the builder who won was a huge company, but that only had made urban sewage. It was its first building. And they didn't really want to build a nice building. They were there only to earn money. So we started to act as a guerrilla, talking with the workers directly, not with the chiefs, and explaining the importance of this building for Peruvian people. So we built really with them, and they were hiding extra hours from their patron, the chief of because they wanted to do it well. Yeah. But by their means, so they were low-skilled workers, but we started to work with them to make decisions about, for example, how to put the pebble paving. So each one was suggesting how to put it, and that's when we decided to put the hands in the entrance. So there are a lot of the main difference, I think, between our work in Europe, because we had almost 16 years working in France, and the work here in Peru, is that the creative process doesn't stop in the execution plans. It goes all over the site works, and we have still the possibility of changing things, because people who build are still craftsmen. I don't know how to tell. They are still concerned about doing well. It's not doing perfect. That's a very important thing. It's not doing perfect. It's doing well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic, the bringing in of those that are making the project and let's say eliminating that gap as part of the process, I think is a fantastic piece in the work as well. And the last question I'm going to ask you, and then we're going to figure out a way to open this up to the larger audience to ask questions, is about drawing. You know, the importance of drawing in your work. I obviously hadn't seen the lecture beforehand, and I've always been fascinated with the kind of sketch, and I love the fact that you actually use that to describe and analyze the projects as you presented them, and how the sketch for you becomes a synthesis of the key ideas of the work, but perhaps more importantly, the way you use drawing as a mediating device between the found condition, or the things that you choose to amplify and transform, and those you choose to conceal, and the making of architecture, you know, because the drawing is a kind of architectonic act. So how do you, and I think that's a really interesting thing because we have very different uses of the drawing throughout the design process. So it would be interesting to know how you think about or use your drawings in that way. And also how you think about the sketch in the context of contemporary technology. Because, you know, it's always a question now about how much we teach students to draw by hand versus their ability to draw with all the tools that they're operating with. You know, and I'm a great lover of and believer that everybody should need to be able to draw for exactly the reasons that you've shown. So maybe talk a little bit about your drawing.
Yeah, it's true that drawing by hand is really a direct connection with the mind, no? And it's not passing through the technology. So it's like
machine.
Yeah. So that's and yeah, I think it's also the way we work together. We are always starting by trying to understand the problematic and try to define the ideas behind that project, the ideas that will support our project. And when we are already, after a lot of talking, when we agreed of these ideas, we start, I love to make models, Jean-Pierre loves to sketch and drawing. So we start both doing that and confront these magnificent tools together and try to arrive to a first sketch of the project, no?
Yeah, I think the sketches are not only the only tool we use. It's very important at the beginning because we try to formalize ideas and in a certain way to validate that what we are thinking is okay.
It's possible, no?
It's possible to do, yeah. And it's okay. But we always go from sketches to models. Models appear, very little models appear almost at the same time of sketches. And then we have to be sure we're in a good way, in a good way. So we start to draw at our studio. We start drawing very precisely with a CAD. Even we use BIM, a BIM program. So we have 3D models at the same time of accurate plans. But they are not fixed yet. They can inform us about dimension, exact proportions, because it's not only, it has, even if we say the building starts to draw a map, etc., it doesn't it doesn't mean we don't draw precise drawings, and they are essential. And the more precise we draw the building, the more the building can absorb indetermination. So that's very important. So we go back from these precise plans to our sketches to see if the plans are true to our ideas, are better than the sketches or the models, or they are not. If they are not, we start again. You know? Or we try to find where's the problem.
Yeah.
So it's there's no formulas. It's going back and forth.
Yeah, and sometimes the key drawing is a section, and we can change many things in plan, but the section, the idea of a space remains. So also
that's very important also for us, for our doing.
No, that's fantastic. Well, I'm going to try to open this up to the audience, and Sneha, you're going to help me curate this. I didn't notice our little blue hand at the bottom. Did that disappear? Because I was thinking we had sort of two modes through which people could ask a question, either by clicking on the hand tool. Sneha, did that disappear?
It's not on yours because you're a host.
But
for everyone else to be able to.
Okay, good. All right. So you can either click on the hand tool to ask a question, or you can use the chat if you want to type in a question that we will ask on your behalf. I guess we'll start with Felipe.
Hello, Sandra and Jean-Pierre. Thank you for a great lecture. As always, there was a lot of new work I hadn't seen, and of course, it was equally as thrilling. So thank you for doing this in an online setting. You are our first online lecture, and we can see it's been amazingly successful. I wanted to ask maybe a little bit more about sort of the larger culture of practice in the context where you work, right? And where I've also worked for many years, in sort of specifically in Latin America and specifically in South America. And a lot of what we were discussing before had to do with issues of limitations, limitations of budget, limitations of sort of technique. But the counterpoint of that is that there also a certain amount of permissiveness, right? Permissiveness in many cases in terms of codes, some that are sort of certain restrictions that don't exist in terms of building construction, others that are overseen. And I wonder if you could actually speak a little bit about maybe this negotiation between constraints and permissiveness. Just to give you an example, you produce, for example, amazingly thin roofs, which are quite beautiful. They also don't need to hold HVAC systems, right? So there's a certain permissiveness in relationship to that. And I wonder if you could sort of speak about how sort of these two things come together in the way that you think your projects for this particular context.
Yeah, I think it's very important to explain this in the context of our doing that was like, that really started in Europe. And we are Peruvians, but we started doing architecture in Europe, and then we came back. So we were like locals in France, local architects in France, and then we came back, and in a certain way we became local architects in Peru. So we had it's very different from an architect that always works in Peru, for example, and makes a building in France. So we had this advantage of being local in both realities. So we could measure what are the big differences between really well-structured society as the French one, that is the same as every country in Europe, more or less the same as the US or Japan. roughly, you know, very roughly. And what do you call the perceivedness? Yeah,
Permissiveness.
Permissiveness. Okay. Of our
Society.
unstructured and structured society. Both have virtues and problems, I think. Let's talk only about South America in general. With unstructured societies, you can have very easily the worst and the best. In Europe, it's very difficult because it's very structured to have the worst and the best, I would say, because there's a lot of barriers preventing or controls preventing things to go bad, but they are preventing also making more difficult the things to go
innovation
in an innovative way. The only innovation in a developed country is the innovation that comes from technology, from new materials, from new materials, essentially. Here we have no new materials, we have no industry, we have only craftsmanship that is still willing to build well, which was non-existent in France at all. I don't know the US, how is it, but in France, nobody builds in order to build a nice building. They build in order to earn money, period. And everything is ruled by insurance companies. So insurance companies are the ones who are deciding for you which materials and which building processes you can use and which you can't. Instead, here in South America, we have a lot of other problems, which are scarcity of means and this instability, general instability, the sites. We have, for example, the Barajas Museum was abandoned for 4 years only because of administration problems, of bureaucracy. So we have to cope with these issues, and I think the things that we South Americans have learned to do since we were kids were to sneak through all these problems in every sense of life. It's not only architecture. So we learn how to invent resources where there aren't, no? Or how to go besides the problems. So this is an attitude I think most South American architects have, and it's, I think, the most common feature we have together, because we have very different types of architecture in South America, but very different climates, etc., etc. But I think is this resourcefulness of trying to get around some problems.
Yeah. So all the decisions that we are making will have this lack of means as a principle.
Yeah.
So
no,
constant principle.
As you said, we if we start drawing nice details, we're sure we're not getting them, for example. So we try to build buildings that are indestructible, because for example here in Peru, but in many countries in South America, architects don't have the authority on the site work. They are nothing in the site work. They are visitors. They don't manage money or things like that. We don't have insurances. We don't have responsibilities on the work site. So we are visitors. But this can give us some advantages. For example, changing things drawn in the plans, or convincing people, as we did in the Place of Remembrance, to do different things that they were supposed to do.
Or convincing the client to change things because they will be better, like convincing them. And
and because nobody knows really what is going to cost the building, because there are no economists to survey for the construction. We don't care. We don't really care, but not even the client, because the client has the same mindset. He says, we will figure out, and if money gets short, so decisions have to be made quickly and very strategically in order to finish the building. So all those things makes that the process of thinking the building, thinking creatively the project, goes until the building is really finished and beyond.
And that's fantastic. I want to ask if there's anybody who wants to ask a question live. We have a question via chat. Any hands? If not, Wu Yishin had a question. First, thanking you for your fantastic presentation. And you should read all the chat notes. There's a lot of compliments for you in the chats in lieu of applause. He says, I'm curious about how you listen to the place and choose the important elements of the place. How do you decide what gets valued? Especially in circumstances when we work remotely, how do you feel the place? What do you do? I mean, you're operating now, obviously, within the context of Peru, but, many architects who are operating globally, what words of wisdom do you have?
Yeah, it's true that if you can't visit the site, you won't feel the atmosphere. But now, yeah, technology allows you to sometimes be there in a virtual way.
But it's not the same.
Yeah, it's not the same. But for example, our students must do this project without knowing the site. But they have the model, they have the stories, they have
and they have us that we can tell them how does it feel to be there, what's happening, and how is the atmosphere of the site. I think
many different things.
It's better to feel it yourself, but the site can be filled by someone you trust in a certain way, that tells you,
or a book, or an article,
or a poem about. I don't know. There are many ways to understand the site. No? It's not only
visual.
Again.
Mm-hmm.
It can be cultural.
I think it's an interesting and important question, because of course it speaks to value and about what it is that you are valuing or attributing value to within the context of a place or a history or culture, etc.
And I would,
Yeah.
sorry, Ayla, I would add something that is, I think is important, that not knowing the site sometimes is good, is a good thing, because you have a fresh view in relationship to someone who does know it. You can have a fresh view over the site. So I won't say that if you don't see the site, it's a catastrophe.
And I think that's a really interesting approach, because inventiveness also comes sort of through the accident or through the distance, because sometimes you're so close to something that you actually can't see it new, right?
Yes.
Which I think is an interesting one.
Yeah, and we did Akise house, our first house in Peru. We did it from Paris, without knowing the site and without. Of course, we are Peruvians. We know more or less
the culture,
the kind of site we are dealing with, but we were like blind in terms of precision on the site, precision on the means. And we couldn't talk with the workers, etc.
So I'm looking at the screen or the chats and participants. Martin has a question. Go ahead and unmute, Martin.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thanks to you guys at the UVA Architecture School for opening up this space for everyone at the architectural community here in Charlottesville. So thank you for that. And thank you also, Jean-Pierre and Sandra, for sharing your amazing work with us. My question to you guys is in relationship to the university facilities project. And several times you have expressed that your work looks back at ruins, pre-Incaic and Incaic ruins, and uses them as a reference for your projects. And looking at the university facilities project, it seems like it is a building that could continue to provide a meaning to the place where it sits, even if the program disappears in time. So my question for you guys is, how do you approach this duality between program and place during design, knowing that, you know, clients will always require the building to respond to a specific program in a specific time? Where do you find that space, you know, for, you were already mentioning the space in between. Is this where this idea can come into play? Thank you.
Yeah, I think we had a very precise program from the client. The only thing we could change was to not to put air conditioning in every classroom. That was the only change that we could introduce. But we managed to convince them that we needed, the campus needed a new center, a new place where people can gather, because there are no places to gather. And we might think, at the beginning we thought, well, there's the dry forest, so people can gather under the trees and sit and study, and let's do a less compact scheme. But the thing is that algarrobos, these trees, the carob trees, have big spines, so people can't go under the trees to sit and chat. So that gave us the idea that we should recreate a new shade. And again, the problems are always opportunities. We were asked by our clients, because we were doing another project that was never built, already for them. So we knew each other already. We knew the site already. And they asked us, one day they called us from Pura, and they said, they asked us if we could make this building in 15 months. Not the project, the whole building, and open to the students 15 months from that day. And that's also a very South American way. We said, sure, we can, there's no problem, no? Because we South Americans can't say no, no? We're so enthusiastic, we say yes, and we were sure we wouldn't finish in 15 months, but we did it. Incredibly, but we did it. And that became a huge asset for us, because the client didn't have time to hesitate. And we didn't neither. So when we said, let's make the spaces in between more important than the program, and this will cost only a little bit more because it's only the slabs. There's no need to waterproofing, to insulate, to heat, or to refresh those spaces. And the client said, okay, so we started doing that. And I'm sure in normal conditions, maybe it would be much, much more difficult to do them. And this thing that was at the beginning a hinge from us, it was not really so assertive and reflected decision. What happened is that we created a building that can evolve in time. This can change. This can be another thing. This can be offices, and it will work the same. No? And one of the things that the jurors at the MCHAT told us is that this could be a new typology for education, and not only for education. So, and when they were like telling us this while visiting the building, we were discovering that with them, no? Because there are some decisions that you have to trust yourself to make them, because it's not really a fully thought decision, no? It's a hinge.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm answering the question. But.
No, yes, and also it's true that when we receive from clients a list of surfaces, you have always to think that you have to propose spaces that will link this list of surface. No, that's sometimes the spaces that relate one to the other program are more important than the program themselves. So it's always, you have always in projects the opportunity to propose things that the client hasn't thought about. No? In the place of remembrance, for example, we haven't been asked in the competition for a public space. And for us, it was evident that this type of building needs a really public space. And so that was, for us, very important in the proposal. This plaza square, big square, that has to link the society with the building, with the program. No? So it's true that there are sometimes voids in the programs, no? That you have to.
Of course, all of that with the same amount of money. No,
of course.
Of course. If it's free, it's better even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Martin. So I don't think we have any additional questions for the audience. I'm going to ask all of, if we have any admitted students in the group, to stay on. And I'm going to ask everyone else to, one, feel free to leave your comments for Sandra and Jean-Pierre through the chat, as some of you have done, in the absence of the kind of louder applause. And certainly, because this is our first virtual lecture, and it's kind of a test, but one of the things is that it enables us to reach a broader audience. If you think that's a great idea to keep doing in the future, put a thumbs up on beside your name on the participants panel as well. And join me in thanking the two of you for this really wonderful lecture and an amazing body of work. So thank you. And all of you who are guests, you can leave the meeting by just clicking on Leave Meeting. And some of us will continue. So thank you again to both of you for teaching and for this incredible lecture.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Are we leaving us?
Yeah, well, you can also stay if you would like to chat with the admitted students. I'm going to have a conversation with them after, so it's up to you.
No.
Okay, no, we
Yes, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Ayla.
Thank you, Ayla. Bye.
Bye-bye. No, I will read the comments before.
So maybe I can open it up. I'm assuming that the rest of you, if you want to turn on your video cameras, if possible. It's always nicer to be able to see somebody that you're talking to. And if you've got questions or things like that, you can either write them in chat or to certainly open it up and ask you. Anybody have any questions or comments? We have a lot of thank yous. Don't feel shy. You know, this is just for you if you had additional things that have come up and you wanted to talk about or had questions in relation to the school, so they don't need to be in relation to this lecture. But we wanted to give you the opportunity while you were online to be able to do that. Here we go. How many visiting professors does the school usually have for the year? We usually have at least 4 visiting professors each year. We have the Thomas Jefferson professor. These are endowed professorships. So the Shure professors like Jean-Pierre and Sandra, the Thomas Jefferson professor, we have the Robertson professor, and we also have the Porter visiting chair. And there are other, besides our visiting professors, and our visiting professors do different things. So many times they will come in and teach for a semester, as Jean-Pierre and Sandra were doing, they're teaching an advanced studio. So they were coming in, and it depends on where somebody is coming from. Sometimes they'll be coming in every week, sometimes every other week, and often it's a co-teaching arrangement. So they're co-teaching with someone from the school, so that you always have somebody in the studio or the classroom. We've also had sometimes visiting professors do a specific project. So we had Rintala Eggertson did a design build project with us. And they both came over a 6-week period. So, you know, one of them was, each of them was with us for 4 weeks and they overlapped for a week. And that was another way. We've had visiting faculty come and teach a seminar that might be in a more concentrated form. But we try to get the most out of our visiting lectures. And of course, it's a great opportunity each year to bring in different people. I should also say we have some lectures, like the Michael Owen Jones lecture, that is a student-selected position each year. And the students get together and they decide who they would like to bring. And Sneha has also put up that we have a YouTube site that we post all of our visiting lectures. So you can also go to our YouTube site and see some of our past lectures. But they're usually phenomenal people. Anyone else have any questions or comments? It looks like not. I don't want to close this, but if you're all good, I guess we can all end for the evening. But thank you for joining us. We've decided, because of the situation, that we would make a certain number of our lectures that were planned for this semester happen virtually. So you'll be able to join them. We'll also have some classes that you can join and things like that. So thank you all for joining today. And as I said, the last time I met with students, potential students, is that you can always feel free to email me, and we can also do a one-on-one Zoom chat if you're interested. Okay, everyone. Certainly, you know, online, Sneha, I'm hoping, Sneha, and I'm assuming this is the case, that all of our admitted students are also on our site. Are they getting our weekly announcements and things like that?
They are, yes.
Great, perfect. All right, well, thanks everyone, and goodbye. And hopefully we'll do this again soon.
Stay safe, everyone.
Yes, absolutely.